day in and day out, you are the folks that are bringing the necessary goods and conveniences to the Commonwealth citizens. You're doing it. And I want to tell you, you're on the front line, and I'm, on behalf of Pennsylvania, very appreciative of how you're delivering these goods and services to Pennsylvania citizens. And we are acutely aware of the difficulties that you sometimes face. Please, you should use, obviously you use Dave and Alex's resources, but use us as resources too. And I mean that sincerely. I'm not going to know the frontline issues because I'm not doing what you do, but you know them, and you're going to educate us on them, and we'll help to change those laws to get out of your way to be more successful in dealing with your customers. One of them, obviously, is the issue of privatizing wine and spirits in Pennsylvania. Now, I don't have to tell you this, but it's so archaic. It's so emblematic of Pennsylvania just being, you know, I've always felt like a backward state. And here we are, we're the second state to ratify the United States Constitution. You know, Pennsylvania is a colony, goes back to 1682. There was a Speaker of the House in 1682. William Penn comes over, founds Pennsylvania, has a treaty with the Delaware Indians, and then he sets up this democratic government in 1682. We predate the United States by 100 years. And the fact of the matter is, so we're not making the changes to move ourselves into the 21st century. Only Pennsylvania and Utah, you probably hear it often, had a complete monopoly on the sale of wine and spirits. And it's so interesting to me when I see the public so significantly in support of the changes, and certain politicians who, for a wide variety of special interest reasons, you can imagine what they might be, want to get in the way, right? They don't want it to happen. They like the trinkets, right? That's really in the essence of it. You know, the control from being an elected official over aspects of the private sector. That's what makes Pennsylvania so backwards sometimes. And whenever I wanted to take on sort of some of those shibboleths, the most obvious one to me was this area of wine and spirits, the LCB. If you really are serious about limited government, that's the most glaring example. Now, we've had some success. We basically passed in the House full privatization 4 times. Once in 2013 under Governor Corbett, but he couldn't get the Senate to move forward. And then we did it in June of 2015. We did get the Senate to move forward. And we put it on the governor's desk, Governor Wolf, and he vetoed it. And then we did it again in the end of 2015, which became the vehicle by which we put this compromise. Not when I say compromise, we really didn't enter into a compromise. It was the vehicle that the Senate said we could go this far in exchange for doing all these taxes. We didn't do those taxes, by the way. And we put that bill right on the governor's desk. And by putting that bill on the governor's desk, he didn't really have a choice but to sign it. Because after vetoing full privatization, he was going to sign a bill that allowed wine to get into stores with our licenses, you know, the seating myth, and then in addition, you know, the direct shipment. I want to tell you just a little bit about what's happened so far on that front. The LCB has approved 428 applications for expanded wine, and under the Act, though, we have 1,200 expired restaurant licenses that are to be made available. Now, there's not a timetable in the statute. So you and I have to pressure them into keeping to a timetable. We will continue to do that. At the beginning, they were fairly accommodating, I would say. That has changed recently. It's changed. They're coming up with lots of excuses not to approve these licenses right now. So as a group, we're going to have to maintain pressure and call it out. You know the old proverbial saying, when you put the spotlight on it, the cockroaches run. And there's some element of truth to that. So we have to continue to put the pressure on. There have been 2 auctions, 37 purchased in November of 16, 42 in March of 17, but it should be much more comprehensive than that, and we're gonna stay at it. Now, Governor Wolf is still gonna veto full privatization, as you know. So we sent over a number of bills to the Senate, incremental but significant, and the one that I had focused most of my attention on was this House Bill 975, and I call it Free the Wine. Why? In working with some of your members, I'm from out west, certainly including Giant Eagle, which is I get sent on the late night errands for milk and whatever, the extra stuff. Lydia does the real shopping. We felt that the key was, okay, here's the compromise for now. We'll let spirits stay in these antiquated stores, but let the wine go to any grocery store without this seating requirement. Let wine be able to be bought from wholesalers and brokers without having to go through the LCB. And don't put any pricing requirements. No floor, right? No floor. Be able to sell what you would at a market level. Oh my goodness, that sounds like capitalism. Why would we do that? But anyhow, that's the start that we would like to see. To be honest with you, I suspect most of you think that's what we ought to be doing with beer too, because to a major extent, while beer is not government owned, it's pretty antiquated as well. And I think most Pennsylvanians would really like to see, at a minimum, beer and wine to be able to be bought like they buy it in other jurisdictions all across the United States. We have 3 other bills that members have sponsored and passed over there. One by Adam Harris that creates these franchise stores. One by Mike Reese, which would take what we've done with our licenses for wine that would just include spirits amongst that license as part of that license. And then one that divests us from wholesale completely, because the wholesale is the real fiction, right? It's an interesting thing. We have a layer of wholesale. And it took me time to learn, even though it's so simple. You would all know it because you get it. It's not that we supplant the private sector wholesale. We just make the private sector wholesale sell to this phony government wholesale, and then we go to the retail. It's just like an extra layer of additional cost to suck up money without any real purpose of getting product to customer, right? I'm not really sure, other than government monopoly, what it serves. So I don't think the Senate will ever take that up, but the reality is that's the essence of eliminating the LCB. We'll still regulate, we'll still tax. We're government, right? Now, hey, listen, I know that folks wanted to talk a little bit about the budget. Governor Wolf, in that first budget, it's interesting. We don't have the money that could come from the public sector unions that can then go through the Democratic Governors Association to go and then run ads that are supposed to be independent ads. We don't have that kind of money to be able to go out and just try to bully their way with millions of dollars and mailings and ads. But I want to tell you a little bit about that first budget with this governor. He wanted $13 billion in increased taxes over 2 years. Personal income tax increase, sales tax increase, tax on daycare, tax on diapers, tax on senior centers, tax on financial transactions. Always be afraid of the term structural deficit, because that's just slang for tax increase. Because if anybody was really serious about a structural deficit, they would be banking all the revenue, holding expenditures low, and eating up what the quote unquote deficit is, if you believe that. But what happens is they raise the revenue and then they spend it all and then more. Okay, and then you're back right having the same discussion in another year or two. And some new person says, oh, structural deficit. That's how a budget works. Now, all of you read financial statements. I'm not sure everybody in Harrisburg does. Certainly not in the governor's office. They have a wide variety of new taxes they want to do again. But in that first budget, We passed a balanced budget in June of 2015. He vetoed it, along with pension reform and along with full privatization. We sent another budget in September of 2015. He vetoed that. We sent a third budget. Some Republicans were ready to let go. And sent a third budget. Senate passed our budget. He had to sign most of that, 90% of it. And he called it, quote unquote, garbage. And then in March of 2016, when we had to finish the last 10% of the budget, we did it without tax increases, without any tax increases, and it spent less than the original budget we put on his desk in June of 2015. And one of the things I learned from that experience is this. I'd always thought this, but it proved to me correct. Everybody that receives those tax dollars, right, they say they're mandatory increases, mandatory increases. Well, the close to $1 billion in extra spending that we did not spend, nobody complained, because everybody had money to maintain the services that they provide. Everybody. Schools, health systems, prisons, everybody was able to adjust budgets completely appropriately, and keep in mind, there was a growth in that budget from the previous year. Oftentimes when people say they made cuts, like the governor said he had $2 billion in cuts, I'm looking around like, where are these cuts? The governor spends about $1 billion more than he did last year in his budget, and he has about $350 million in cuts with increases in expenditures by about $1.4 billion. Those aren't cuts. And shifting to off-budget items, you know, where you're going to pay for it not out of general fund revenue, but find some other place to pay for it, that's just a shift. That's not a change. That's not a reduction in government or overhauling government. It's just disingenuous. On the pension front, folks, here's the thing. We have contributed to PSERS alone over the last 3 years. We have contributed alone over the last 3 years an increase of close to $1 billion annually. Last year's was about $350 million. Before that, it was about $500 million. And this year, it's going to be about $150 million. Just these three budgets alone. Under Governor Rendell, twice contributions to the pension systems were reduced. Conveniently, under Governor Corbett, or whoever was going to be the next governor, but it was Governor Corbett, the step up in the law of the contributions increased. Now, some people wanted to readjust that down again. We did not. We met our obligation each and every year. We met it every year. But every growth, every dollar that was a consequence of a growth in revenue really went to the pensions. That's where it went. That and Medicaid expansion. You know, when President Obama did the Affordable Care Act, really much of that was imposed upon the states, the cost going forward with the Medicaid expansion. And Pennsylvania already has a very generous Medicaid coverage policy in comparison to other jurisdictions, and now we've just expanded it. So you've got the pensions and you've got Medicaid expansion. And yet you've got these public sector unions. My dad was a public school teacher, he's passed away. But the reality is you have to turn off the spigot. The private sector has been in the defined contribution space since the early 90s, mid 90s at least. Now, it is true that no other government entities, many other government entities have not, in fact, there's very few that have made this shift, but it has to get done. And we did pass a product, it was a hybrid product that the governor vetoed. And then we passed a lesser model with some, believe it or not, with some Democratic votes. But it had an escalator on this hybrid. It would be a pension up to a certain salary and then a 401k above that salary. But the problem was there was an escalator in what the salary was, such that in a way, like we were saying, we were getting to pension reform, but I'm not sure if we're really getting to a lot. But we passed it. Senate didn't take that version up. And here's the thing, we have to do it. Right now, in our budget annually, $2.1 billion goes to the teachers' pensions alone on an annual basis. And we are just at our actuarially required number just this year. So it's significant. And you've got to ultimately turn off the spigot and move into the 21st century. And we're going to continue to work on that front. We hope to have a bill to pass here with the Senate, but it's been slow sledding right now. I know some people have brought up the issue up of spot appeals. I don't know how many of you that impacts given your community or your jurisdiction. But House Bill 1213, which is a bill that I had sponsored in the past, there's a good guy, a great guy named Warren Camp out of Chester County, if any of you are there, who a lot of the bills I used to sort of like run with. Warren, really sharp guy, does a much better job of picking them up and pushing them, and this is one of them. It's going to report out of committee, I believe, today, and it limits spot assessments. And a taxing district may not appeal the assessment of a property based on the purchase or sale of the property, purchase or sale of a partial or total interest in the entity holding the title, financing or refinancing of the property, or investments in the property, including safety elements or those required by disability laws. It would very much limit the ability to do an assessment unless it's from a countywide assessment, the parcel's divided and conveyed in smaller parcels, or a change has actually occurred in the productive use of the property. It's really very timely and very important legislation, and I hope we get it out of the House and over to the Senate. That's our goal. We're going to get it out of committee, and that's a big start.